presentation. So I think next I'm going to give the stage to our panelists to start talking about how we can empower the underrepresented people with forest research as well as the actions. So I'm going to introduce our speaker, Rocío Cóndor, who is a forest officer of the FAO, and she is leading the implementation of the enhanced transparency framework under the Paris Agreement for the Forestry Division of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, or FAO. And recently, she has coordinated a global project called CBIT Forest, which is the building global capacity to increase transparency in the forest sector. And so without further ado, Rocío, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Jinjin. I hope you can hear me. Akani, can you confirm? Thank you. Thanks, Jinjin, and the organizers for giving us the opportunity and a space to interact with all of you through this hybrid event. I was happy to accept the invitation from Jinjin, and I have asked colleagues working on forest and climate action also to join me. I believe that this collaboration and this synergy will enrich the conversation we have started. This session was prepared together with all the speakers, including Jinjin and the students from the Forest Advanced Computing and Artificial Intelligence Lab. And it was a wonderful experience to share, learn, and reflect together on how we are working, all of us, towards empowering science and enriching diversity through our work. We will share with all of you our personal and professional experiences, and we hope this session can contribute to the series of webinars that will be held in the coming weeks and inspire all of you to take action on your area of work as part of the academia, government, research institution, and among others. Today with me, Javier Gamarra, who works also at the FAO and is part of the steering committee of the Global Forest Biodiversity Initiative, and it's also advisory committee of Science Eye, who will moderate the roundtable. And with me also Marcela, Maricarmen, and Pilar, and colleagues from the lab. And so back to you, Javier. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rocío. I hope people can hear me. It's okay?
Yes.
All right. So as an introduction, basically, I'm going to be the moderator today. I must say that although Science Eye, as Jinjin mentioned, is mostly a platform designed to raise the voice of the underrepresented in scientific research, we have today a set of panelists working on international development. We believe, however, that science itself needs to raise its voice in the real world of policy formulation and implementation, specifically that designed for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. So to trigger the discussion on the topic of this session, we do have some questions for our colleagues, and we will also collect questions from the public and online, which will be addressed at the end of the roundtable. So please remember, if you are online, please put your questions in the Q&A section rather than in the chat. And if you are among the audience located in Purdue, you can inform the people, Jinjin, in this case, for example, supporting us, the people supporting us presentially, of your intention to ask a question. But the question roundtable, the question will come after the roundtable. So let's start then. The first question is going to go to Rocío, since she has already introduced herself. So Rocío, you are a forestry officer at FAO, but many people are usually unaware of what is the role of the United Nations, and particularly of FAO, regarding climate action. So what do you think FAO is, and what it does, and how are you specifically contributing to, or you and FAO in general, contributing to climate action in the forest sector? Oh, you are muted, Rocío.
Thank you, Javier, also for alerting me. And let me go back to your question. The Food and Agriculture Organization is a specialized agency of the United Nations that leads international efforts to defeat hunger. With 194 countries and the European Union, FAO works in over 130 countries worldwide. FAO seeks to support the 2030 agenda through the transformation to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems for better production, for better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life, leaving no one behind. FAO is recognized for its trusted advisory role at the international level regarding developmental and environmental process, including the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, as well as other international conventions and treaties. I work, as also Jingjing mentioned, in the Forestry Division under a cross-cutting work stream that aims to improve forest-related data and information and capacities, where activities are being implemented by the Global Forest Resources Assessment and the National Forest Monitoring teams. To respond to your question related to my contribution to climate action, let me first provide you with some background information. As you all know, to combat climate change and its impacts, the Paris Agreement represents a commitment by countries to limit the rise of the global average temperature. Therefore, countries are required to provide reports on their emissions and removals and implementation efforts for mitigation and adaptation. The enhanced transparency framework under the Paris Agreement was created to track and report on those individual country commitments. And over the last 2 years, the Forestry Division of the FAO and the Global Environment Facility partnered to implement the global CBIT Forest Project, aiming to step up developing countries' ability to collect, analyze, and disseminate forest-related data, to make forest data transparent and accessible in line with the transparency requirements under the Paris Agreement. We have involved 49 countries from Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean regions, and more broadly, the global network of national correspondents for the Global Forest Resources Assessment from 186 countries and territories. Despite the disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic, the project explored new opportunities, expanding its plan for virtual capacity development, knowledge sharing, and raising awareness through products and events such as webinars, e-learning courses, and massive open online course in multiple languages. All this material is now available for free to anyone, anywhere, at any time. Back to you, Javier.
Okay, thank you very much, Rocío. You are doing a huge amount of activities from what I see, a huge amount of countries and a huge amount of projects involved in it. But let's see what the other panelists have to say. Marcela Olguin is working with SilvaCarbon as a greenhouse gas technical expert in the agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector. She's currently supporting a program actually aiming to foster the role of women in the forest sector in Latin America. So Marcela, you do work for SilvaCarbon. It is a technical program for the US government. Could you very shortly explain the functions of SilvaCarbon and which are the partners involved in SilvaCarbon?
Yes, of course. First, thank you for the invitation, and my pleasure to be part of this panel. So SilvaCarbon, it's about a decade-old interagency technical cooperation program of the US government, which is dedicated to enhancing tropical forested countries' capacity to monitor, measure, and report carbon in their forests and other lands. SilvaCarbon is funded by the USAID and the Department of State, and it is implemented by US federal agencies such as the US Forest Service, the US Geological Survey, NASA, NOAA, the Smithsonian Institute, as well as universities in the US and abroad. I personally have been more involved in supporting countries in the Latin American and Caribbean region, for short, LAC. Some examples of the work we do here include strengthening their national forest inventory, supporting greenhouse gas results reporting to national and international entities, improve approaches to assessing and projecting carbon fluxes, as well as strengthening international collaboration among government partners and academia under a South-South collaboration approach. Also, as you can imagine, on many occasions, we also seek and promote synergies with other international partners, such as FAO, the United Framework Convention on Climate Change, universities, among others. One aspect that we have to come to notice is that despite that countries in the region have demonstrated significant progress in recent years regarding their forest monitoring systems, unfortunately, as in other technical and scientific fields, many of these advances have been also associated with gender bias. Gender bias can cause inequity in participation and access to training opportunities and job offers for women and other people with diverse sexual, social, and ethnic identities. And therefore, about 2 years ago, the SilvaCarbon program started working to investigate gender-based challenges in forest carbon monitoring and reporting with key countries that are partners to SilvaCarbon. In this sense, we have begun exploring new activities aimed to continue to supporting countries in their efforts to create sustainable landscapes and contribute to global initiatives on climate change, such as the Paris Agreement that was mentioned before by Rocío, while we also want to explore, include gender-responsive implementation approaches. So just briefly, and I'm happy to provide more information in the follow-up questions. In the past, or during this year, we've conducted a quick diagnosis, introductory training courses on gender bias, as well as a regional webinar on gender, forest, and carbon intersection. Back to you, Javier. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcela. No, I think it's awesome that you are engaging in this program regarding gender biases, and particularly in developing countries, in this case in Latin America. You will, the audience will see that today our panelists are mostly from Spanish-speaking countries, and they are women. So I think that is also a good opportunity to ask some more panelists about some of these issues that probably touch them even personally. So our third panelist is Maricarmen Ruiz. She is actually based in Panama. She's a REDPAS technical expert and a focal point for the Latin America and the Caribbean region within FAO. Maricarmen, so the question goes to you. As a FAO focal point on the ground in Latin America, what do you think makes the region special in terms of action in the forest sector for climate mitigation?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to be part of this webinar. And based on the question you asked, Javier, well, FAO, I guess first going to start about like how is FAO works in the region in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is like they center their work on regional initiatives that are defined by governments every 2 years and are based on the needs of 33 countries that participate in this regional conference. This conference comprises ministers of agriculture and high-level officials of member nations from the same geographic region and discuss challenges and priorities that are related to food and agriculture. And But specifically now the current regional initiatives are sustainable agricultural system, which seeks to create and promote greater physical and economic access to diversify and nutritious diet for all people in the region. Also, the second is prosperous and inclusive rural societies that stimulate the development of new economic opportunities in lagging territories. And the third initiative is sustainable and resilient agriculture. This last initiative is where my work is based on. The work with forest and climate change and community-based forest monitoring. And it's focused on the preparation also on RED initiative. That is, RED is a way to mitigate emissions by reducing forest deforestation, forest degradation, while fostering conservation of forests, increased carbon stocks, and sustainable forest management. Just also to clarify that when we say sustainable and resilient agriculture, we refer to agriculture in a broad sense. So that includes agricultural practices, livestock, fisheries, and forestry activities. But then this holistic approach make it responsive to climate change at the landscape level and in an integrative way, where forest is viewed as part of the local livelihoods. So specifically working with forests and climate change in Latin America have been led to include local communities. Why? Because indigenous people are key stakeholders of the stewardship of forests in Latin America, where the territories comprise 30% of carbon storage in the forest. So they make a key role to halt deforestation and forest degradation in the region. Therefore, governments to achieve their goals for the United Nations Framework for Convention of Climate Change, mitigation and adaptation actually have to consider local communities as active participants, where capacity building is needed for managing forests sustainably at the community level, and strategies to incorporate national and local actions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maricarmen. So now we all know what our panelists are doing and the line of work that they do, and I would like now then to see the specifics of what is the present of the situation of regarding underrepresented communities in general, and also regarding the issues regarding open science and transparency of open data. So Rocío, you are an expert actually on transparency. So what do you think FAO is doing right now to incentivize the dialogue between science, between decision makers and international organizations?
Thank you, Javier, for the question. And let me say that partnerships are at the heart of FAO's mission to help build consensus. And of course, the effectiveness and credibility of the organization as a policy-making forum and multilingual center of excellent knowledge and technical expertise depends to a considerable degree on its ability to work and develop strategic partnerships with governments, civil society, the private sector, academia, research centers, and cooperatives, making use of each other's knowledge and comparative advantage, of course. Let me share with you all some examples of the key role academia and the research centers, as well as international organizations, had for FAO, based on the work we have recently implemented through the CIG Forest Project. And there are sort of levels I wanted to break out some of the examples in levels. So at the global level, partnering with key global stakeholders has been fundamental. And for example, as also Marcela was mentioning, partnering with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change has been key to ensure consistency of key messages when developing knowledge products related to the transparency framework. We have involved the UNFCCC since the initial steps of the design and the preparation, for example, of an e-learning course on forest and transparency under the Paris Agreement, which is now available actually in 6 UN languages, and it's open to anyone, anywhere, at any time, with the possibility to get a digital badge certification. The e-learning based training approach, combined with providing material in multiple languages, promoted wider stakeholder engagement, inclusivity, and the number of people engaged created better conditions for stakeholder dialogue and learning. And this is, I think, a key lesson learned for us. We have also involved academia to ensure the most up-to-date knowledge is included when we develop any product. And recently we have involved, for example, the Göttingen University in the development of the National Forest Inventory e-learning models, which are useful for planning, implementing, and reporting national forest inventories. These models are now more accessible than ever before. I assume there are many students in the audience today, and through the project activities, we have involved the International Forest Students Association, IFSA, by allocating ad hoc places for them to participate in our capacity building activities during the different editions of the massive open online course on forest and transparency, where we were able to bring around 2,000 participants from 148 countries. Moving to the regional level, we have contributed to South-South knowledge exchanges. For example, we work with countries in Latin American and the Caribbean region. And this process has led to the publication for the first time of a book called National Forest Inventories of Latin American and the Caribbean toward the harmonization of forest information. This is the result of the work of 21 countries of this region that have combined their efforts to compile, review, and illustrate their experiences on implementing national forest inventories, as well as identifying common points and difference in definitions, design, methods, and estimation protocols applies in those countries. We will continue to cement networks regionally and with new partners such as academia to ensure sustainability and transparency of forest reporting. Last but not least, at country level, we have facilitated multi-stakeholder processes to ensure participatory decision-making and information sharing. Recently, we have worked with pilot countries from the 3 regions in order to support them in enhancing their national forest monitoring systems. So in this context, women and men have contributed to identify their needs and gaps and plan to work towards improving their national forest monitoring system. Back to you, Javier.
Thanks, Rocío. So it does look indeed like the dialogue partnerships at different scales seem fundamental towards this aim that we're having on making inclusive forest monitoring systems. But let's go a little bit deeper into that. We are today, Marcela, witnessing the empowerment of underrepresented communities, both in science and in government action. What has been specifically in your experience as a gender expert, what has been your experience in regards to raising awareness of gender-related issues in a highly specialized technical community, including, of course, the LGBTQIA+ community?
Thank you, Javier. And first, to clarify, as mentioned before, that SilvaCarbon has mainly a goal or a focus on providing capacity building and promoting technical exchanges on issues regarding monitoring and reporting forest carbon emissions according to the needs communicated to us by our government partners. However, over the years, it has been evident that there is a gender imbalance in the number of women, men, and other identities that are our technical counterparts in most of the countries where we work. And that we notice that this imbalance in the participants that attend for capacity building events or other similar activities we conduct at regional level. So in 2020, the SilvaCarbon's implementation agencies initiated efforts to identify what are the most common challenges and barriers that, in particular, women in partner countries face at the professional level that are related to gender bias, as well as understand what strategies have been most helpful to overcome these, so that our support to forced carbon monitoring and reporting activities also contributes to reducing gender gaps. At least try to do some initial steps towards that goal. At SilvaCarbon, we realized that this topic had not been discussed, at least not in our network of partners. And although more government institutions have a gender department, many times it is not linked necessarily to the technical teams. So in the specific case of the LAC region, the SilvaCarbon's US Forest Service team started activities towards better understanding our partners' needs and perspectives on gender-related issues, as well as identifying which training modalities would be the most preferred by them in the future. And so in June of this year, we, for example, launched a quick diagnostic with support from gender experts of Colorado State University. And the questions we asked in this diagnostic were to basically start understanding where are the women in this field and what are their barriers as an initial step. And this activity in itself was the beginning of a process of positioning this topic in our network. So to give you some highlights of the results we achieved with this quick diagnostic, we got responses from about 80 people from 20 countries. 58 identified themselves as women, 40% as men, and 2% prefer not to answer. And we got responses from participants from academia, NGOs. However, the vast majority were people working in government institutions at the level of specialized technicians or program coordinators. We asked the participants to share information about these challenges by gender and group their responses within more general categories. For example, the main challenge mentioned by women was about the difficulty of exercising leadership. Other relevant challenges were discrimination and harassment, the balance between work and personal life, the salary gap, as well as the low appreciation of their contributions at times. Although in smaller numbers, there were also women who responded that they had not encountered any gender-related challenges. We also, as I mentioned, we had participation from male colleagues. And when we analyzed the answers shared by our colleagues about the obstacles associated with their gender identity, the vast majority did not identify any. Only a few mentioned the effect that gender quotas, for example, can have when there are few spaces for representation. So we recognize that the current state of gender equality within the forest monitoring reporting community varies among countries. However, from the responses to this survey, it was clear that participants felt that adding gender-related activities is relevant for future capacity building efforts. And for example, in addition to recognizing that women face different obstacles compared to those of male colleagues, most of the survey respondents felt that gender identity does not limit the task for any given field of work. And most participants, and I'm saying like men, female, male, and others, agree that men have some role in improvement of the current situation regarding gender gaps. So to conclude, we believe that raising awareness and the increased need for sensitivity and knowledge about gender inequality facilitates the exchange of ideas, improves mutual understanding, and develops skills for societal change. For example, today we have heard from Rocío and Maricarmen about transparency of forest data and collaboration with indigenous communities. these topics can also bring benefits to the inclusion of gender discussion and showcase the role of different actors in supporting the enhancement of forest monitoring systems. So in this sense, we are very interested in working collaboratively, seeking to establish a community of practice to address issues as relevant as climate change and forest conservation from a more equitable perspective. And I hope at the end of today's session, we can provide more information about this new effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcela. It has been a very integrated answer, I would say. Okay, but most of the answers have been about gender issues. But there are some other actors that are basically very, very fundamental in regards to forests. That is the local communities and the indigenous communities. Forest monitoring actually is traditionally an expensive enterprise that is usually taken by either researchers or timber companies or governments. In recent years, however, local and indigenous communities have taken more proactive roles in monitoring their forest in an effort to incentivize the stewardship of their forest lands. Strengthening land tenure and ownership is critical in climate change mitigation, particularly in Latin America, in fact. So, Maricarmen, could you mention some evidence of the use of monitoring tools or systems to strengthen land tenure?
Yeah, no, thanks, Javier. Definitely. Indigenous people and local communities are key stakeholders to manage forests. So in order to countries to find ways to reduce deforestation and forest degradation, they need to implement activities with local communities. So in that way, FAO have implemented community-based forest monitoring initiative, focusing on building capacity of members of indigenous communities and local communities of the region to empower them to manage their territories. So the training have included, for example, using drones, preparation of flying plans, image processing of those drones, georeferencing, high resolution mapping, manage databases on forest information, and for example, even including how to do some forest inventories in their territories. So the main objective of this capacity building was to identify changes in forest cover, spotting deforestation and forest degradation process to mitigate the impact of climate change. But then during this process, we work also with governments and other partners that were having similar goals. So this collaboration have allowed us both sharing the cost of activities, for example, as you were talking about funding, and also allow to promote like a long-term support of these activities to the local community that we were doing the capacity building. So important, one of the things that is important for the sustainability of these approaches is that do it in the using a free, prior, and informed consent process. So this process it's been accomplished. We're taking into consideration inclusive participatory approach, where views and opinions of community members and traditional authorities were considering. Then these activities were constructed like together based on the needs of the community. And so therefore the action that we were making paved the way to other initiatives reflecting major ownership by indigenous people of using their national resources associated with their land. So one of the things too is that because of not only is the importance of managing their land, also is land tenure. So in this way, we were also complement forest monitoring tools, capacity building with socializing the voluntary guidelines of responsible governance of tenure. That is, there's guidelines developed by FAO that seeks to improve the governance of land tenure, fisheries, and forests around the world, focusing particularly on local communities. So one of the things that I, like in the previous, the previous talk last week, that they were talking about carbon offsets initiatives. For example, in the country that we have intervened, they haven't been the focus on the way that they will apply for example, the tools that we are teaching them. However, most indigenous communities that we have worked with are more concerned on how safeguards are addressed and that the free, prior, and informed consent is followed while addressing RED project, for example. Also, based on the building the capacity, local communities can ensure that the distribution of the benefits of at the country level is according to the contribution on protecting forests in their territories. So one of the things that some of the achievement of this capacity building is a clearer definition of land boundaries, for example, elaboration of community land management plans, early warning system for deforestation and forest degradation, guidelines to make claims, the approval of local concept of regulation, of internal regulation, establishing land use and sustainable management of forest resources, also strengthen forest governance and creating trust. Another key result is that some of the trained indigenous technicians are now having their own organization and offering capacity building and support in mapping indigenous territories in their own country and in also internationally. So one of the things I want to, like when Marcela was talking about gender, we have, tried to make sure that the capacity building include both men and women. And sometimes we will have a good, call for the beginning of the training, but however, we still have had the challenge to maintain women. So they train, but they don't participate all the time, or they don't keep working on community-based forest monitoring. So this is definitely still a challenge that we need to see how we can foster, like the participation of women in these activities.
Thank you very much, Marcela. No, it is surprising. It is amazing to see that while some of us try to give importance to carbon or biodiversity, in many of these communities, what they really appreciate is to be able to manage, control their lands, steward their lands, and it's basically it's based on a relationship of trust and respect with them, right? So it's very interesting to see all of this. We have looked so far into the past and into the present, but now we're going to dare to go deep dive a little bit into the future with our panelists. So Rocío, back to you. We are now in the era of big data, and the availability of forest-related data is also becoming widespread to scientists in general. However, many governments are still very reluctant to share their forest data openly to the public. What do you think the reasons for this apparent lack of transparency, and what can we all do to improve it?
Thanks for this question, and happy to share the experience and lesson learned from the CVIT Forest Project. We have worked with pilot countries from the 3 regions, from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, actually to understand their interest in working toward open data in the forest sector. We have worked together with them to populate what it's called the forest inventory data collection under the FAO's Corporate Food and Agriculture Microdata Catalog. This collection contains microdata, metadata, and related information on forest inventories across different countries. FAO and countries increasingly rely on microdata for monitoring and evaluation, tailoring programming and policy interventions, conducting research, and monitoring important development trends such as sustainable development goals. In this context, we have supported countries improving their quality of the data sets, as well as help them to define which were the variables they want to openly share through the Food and Agriculture Macrodata Catalog platform, among other activities, of course. At any point in time, country counterparts take decisions on which data are to be opened, and often they prepare to distribute them from their own platforms, which we also support in building. So some of the lessons learned I can share today is that there is often an initial reluctance by countries to share forest data motivated by fears of illegal logging or simply losing control of their data. Countries need more incentives to transparency, and donors could play a role alone. Secondly, there is a lack of an initial data hosting infrastructure, which is often also a deterrent in countries to open data. There is still a lack of capacity to develop and maintain those data-related platforms. Last and not least, also institutional forest and legal expertise is needed when talking about open data with countries, particularly in circumstances where sensitive data disclosure policies are involved. Please check our publication, our Open and Transparent Forest Data for Climate Action. And if you are interested also to learn more about these food and agriculture microdata catalog, join us in 2 days. Thank you. Back to you, Javier.
Thanks, Rocío. Thanks very much. So yeah, that is a very interesting point to raise regarding because in the end we are here talking to an audience that is somehow interested also in these new platforms, innovation platforms like such as ScienceEye, for example. So it is good to talk about data and about open data in particular. I want to remind actually the audience before we continue that we are going to go relatively soon to the question and answer session, and please, I encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A tab in case you have questions for later. I think the discussion today is very interesting, and I'm very sure there can be potentially lots of questions out there. So please go into the Q&A and write your questions. Marcela, we are seeing today largely a big push for climate actions all over the world, and particularly also by young women from underrepresented geographies. How do you see then the future role of women in decision making? And do you see gender inclusion in science and government in the global south enhancing in the context of forest monitoring and reporting?
Sounds great, good question. Yes, okay, so thank you, Javier. Let me first mention that the discussion around the role of women in this context does not only refer to dividing the world between female and male issues, in addition to recognizing a diversity of sexual identities. It is also important to acknowledge the multiple dimensions that constitute gender, that ultimately shapes individual opportunities and experiences, and that includes social class, religion, cultural background, like Maricarmen was mentioning, and of course, age. For example, based on the responses from our quick survey that I mentioned before, regarding the challenge of stereotypes to exercise leadership, some of the female colleagues mentioned different personal characteristics and life circumstances that affected them on the level of receptivity or the weight given to their proposals because they were young, or on the high pressure to perform put on them by male colleagues as well as from other female colleagues because they were mothers. So to advance the understanding of gender perspective and experiences in decision-making within our community, in the past weeks, we conducted a webinar series on gender, forest, and carbon. Rocío participated in that seminar, so we're very thankful with her. And we did this seminar in collaboration with Colorado State University and the UNFCCC to reflect on some of the challenges and opportunities that exist to integrate a vision of equity in the technical scientific activities of the forestry sector, and to share experiences of women in management positions and their important contributions to forest conservation and climate change mitigation, and to identify recommendations on how to integrate the gender perspective within our community, and of course, inspire younger generations. So SilvaCarbon is not a program, I want to say this also, that seeks to become a reference in terms of the theories and practices regarding gender. However, we are interested in helping mainstreaming gender with our partners and showcase the work and contributions of those that are underrepresented in this field. So to answer your question on the future role of women in decision-making in the context of forest monitoring and reporting within the LAC region, I would like to share some initial findings on the advances as well as the remaining challenges that 16 panelists and about 200 participants from 20 countries share with us during this recent webinar series. So first, women are active protagonists in forest carbon science and climate change negotiations. And in this sense, I don't see any reason for not advancing and consolidating this important role in the future. Second, men and women have the same level of technical skills and professional performance. Even so, we heard from our panelists about biases that affected career choice or assignment of tasks. For example, there is usually less participation of women in specialized areas such as remote sensing. And there are even papers about documenting this aspect. And many face challenges in terms of the recognition of their contributions, particularly in predominantly male sectors outside of their institutions. In addition, some women face barriers to professional development, especially when it comes to having children and taking care of them. In fact, women continue to have double or triple roles, including caretakers or family and other household duties. And according to the UN statistics, even women in science tend to have a big gap in their careers, even when they get to tertiary education because of reproductive roles. So maybe some of the reflections that Maricarmen was just sharing about the work with indigenous community has to also do with this reproductive roles of women. Third, although there is progress in formalizing gender equity processes in several countries that we work with in the region of Latin America, challenges remain in terms of access to jobs due to gender bias. For example, about prejudgments regarding the physical resistance that women can have for fieldwork in national forest inventories. We also heard from the audience about challenges faced by young women while questioning their emotional intelligence, or about harassment from older people. I also want to mention that in all of the sessions we had with the panelists, there was also the panelists mentioned also stories about the importance of support for the development of women's professional career. And in this sense, two major points were mentioned repeatedly to promote and retain women in this area. First, continued support from mentors within institutions, which encourage not only the professional development, but also help as role models and are supporting this development throughout their careers. Secondly, the institutional flexibility and infrastructure to allow, for example, childcare during the working day, as well as the support of their partners or other members of their family for the distribution of tasks that are generally attributed to women. Finally, I want to emphasize that people do not have to be a gender expert to actively contribute to the elimination of gender bias within this highly specialized technical area and take a leadership role. before, Javier, you introduced me as a gender expert. I'm not, but I'm very happy that I'm starting to reflect on these aspects and trying to create some discussion around these aspects within my community. So we consider that this last reflection is key to triggering many of the changes that we still need to implement as a community. And we believe that younger generations will be able to use all of the knowledge being produced in this area, the technological tools and platforms, such as ScienceEye, and their evident interest to address social inequities in environmental issues will accelerate the changes required to empower the unrepresented. So with that, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to continue this dialogue. And last but not least, I would like to also mention that at the end of this session, we will be sharing links to our social media, SilvaCarbon's social media, as well as the link to a YouTube channel in which you can check on this webinar series that we organize on gender, forest, and carbon. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Marcela. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go to the last question before the Q&A session. Maricarmen, you can be relatively short here. The final question is basically, ScienceEye is a platform that aims to build science collaboration networks, focusing on raising the voice of underrepresented groups in research. In forest monitoring, Latin American countries have recently established a collaborative network towards the exchange of experiences behind forest inventories. Are there, do you think, lessons to learn from this South-South cooperation? And how could we open these government-led initiatives to downscale towards researchers across the globe?
Yeah, so South-South cooperation in general have been, like very instrumental to empower the national and local level, where, like it's always peer-to-peer exchanges provide a good platform for sharing experience on how they overcome challenges that might be similar within countries. For example, South-South cooperation, especially for forest inventories, help identify funding, for example, for doing field work or some laboratory work. Also, giving herbarium support, for example, exchanging botanical samples within herbarium, sharing allometric equation within countries that share similar species distribution. So, there's those are kind of like some activities that have benefit from these South-South exchanges. But I can talk about also other type of collaboration or recommendation to the scientific community. For example, establishing networks between universities and governments to be able to apply scientific knowledge. And this will help countries to find solutions to manage forests and respond to climate change and converting it to policy. This could be done doing internships with governments and institutions and even local organizations. So another recommendation could be also, creating interdisciplinary programs where there are some mandatory courses for grad students of different departments. For example, I benefit for an international program where nature-based solutions and environmental policy courses were taken by grad students from different programs like agriculture, biology, environmental science, geography, political science. So this allowed the interaction between students with different views and provide integrative solutions to climate change challenges. And so this in the long term also develop interdisciplinary and inclusive collaboration between grad students that will be at the long run, focus on their professional experience. So also, even like providing knowledge transfer to governments and local communities that could support country delegations in the negotiation of certain topics in the Convention of the Parties of the Convention of Biological Diversity, in the United Nations Framework for Climate Change, for example. So there are many possibilities that interactions can be fostered and where scientists definitely can have a big impact to make it science more inclusive to governments, for example.
Okay, thank you very much, Maricarmen. So I think we have finalized now the roundtable, and we would like to go very quickly through some of the questions that the audience have formulated. And I think, Rocío, that the first question might go for you. I think I don't remember the first question. I think seems to come from Laura Marquez. I think that she says that she's working on a project using European NFI and would be really interested in including NFIs from Latin America and the Caribbean. She's asking whether you are willing to share the data in specific variables, and if so, which is the procedure to follow to contact and work with the data providers. And she thanks you for the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for this question. So probably Laura refers to ENFIN, which is this European network. I assume that, and actually FAO is learning very much from the already existing National Forest Inventory Network. So happy that you have joined us. What I can say is that the NFI network in Latin America, it's a process that actually started some years ago, and it has been sort of consolidated. And actually last week in Panama, and Maricarmen can confirm, there has been the consolidation of formal consolidation, I would say, of these NFI LAC. What I can do, I would put my contact in the chat, so maybe you can write me an email and I can put you in contact with the person that is coordinating this process with the network. What I can also do is share with you, I think we already did it in the chat, but I will share with you the Spanish and the English version of the book we have developed, where you can get information of these countries, and hope that that helps. Thank you.
Thanks, Rocío. Okay, we have another question, and I think that is gonna go for you, Marcela. It's by Aurélie, and she says that she asks what could be the reasons for women and other not cis males to bail out of the learning process in forestry. Is this already researched? Do you believe this to be psychological, meaning the feeling of not belonging in this male-dominated world, or due to other duties such as family, out of fear? Basically, what can we do to counter this? Okay, firstly, we have to know what is the reason, but what is your personal advice based on that experience?
Gracias, Javier. Yes, and thank you for the question. I actually, in this last part of the round of questions, I try to answer some of this. Within this particular community working in forest monitoring, there hasn't been really a lot of research regarding what happens with this, the reasons for women to bail out of the learning process. But it's not very different from what has been documented. I'm pretty sure, and based on the survey and the interactions with our colleagues, from what it has been documented in other communities within, let's say, the environmental sector. And it has to be with the things that you already mentioned. First, also starting with the selection of the career. Many women would feel that they're not capable of pursuing careers that has a lot of math, and conduct very thorough analysis, like I was saying before, the remote sensing analysis. And I've seen in recent years more literature about how to promote that more women choose those type of careers. But then once they're in this type of fields, of course, what I was mentioning before, the different roles that women play in taking care of their family, and when they decide to have children, etc., without having the support of their family or their partners, or having an institution that allows, for example, in some countries, that men also take paternity leave, not only women. Without having that kind of support, women will tend to simply stop their careers, professional development, maybe still maintain their work in the institutions, but not necessarily pursue something with high responsibilities, for example. So I was reading recently and listening to a panel on climate change and gender, and one of the key points was about leadership. And also within our community, we have been requested to promote more training on leadership skills, and that's important, and that's very useful. But without the reflection that this other panel was doing at the end, is that without making important changes at the institutional level, just having those trainings are not enough to retain the women. So changing the structures, the culture behind these institutions. I hope I have answered.
Thank you, Marcela. So it seems to be mostly an institutional and cultural process that needs to go on. We have another question, and that might go for you, Maricarmen. It is from Carol Colfer. She's interested to hear what experience you have had, or FAO has had, with ethnic disempowerment or marginalization. And specifically, she mentioned that there are other ethnic groups that sometimes maybe look down upon by others, and she was wondering whether they are recognized at all, whether that fact is recognized at all in your line of work.
Thanks, Carol, for that question. Yeah, definitely the way, so we have been, evolving the way we have approached this capacity building and empowering local communities. For example, one of the first intervention that was in Panama, for example, the communities that participate were able to speak Spanish. So they were having their own language, but they were able to speak Spanish, and we include all of them. But however, then when we started working in other countries, we encounter language problems, like that they were not speaking Spanish, or they were not speaking the language that of the trainers. So for example, in one of the things I saw in the case of Paraguay, for example, they were speaking, this was Guarani, they were not speaking Spanish. They knew a little bit, but understanding the capacity building. So one of the things that we did, two things. First, having local, people that they were translators that will help us in the capacity building. And second, we did peer-to-peer exchanges. So what had happened is that some of these groups that have not been able to participate in many different capacity building is that they feel that they are not able to do stuff. So, and then the way that they feel more encouraged is by having a peer to show them that they can do it. So, because if I come from FAO, like, oh no, this woman, she's not, I don't identify with her. So then it's harder, it creates a barrier. And so we noticed that having those interactions have helped. And because actually I was recently, a month ago, I received a WhatsApp of one of the, the technician in Paraguay, for example. They were like, Maricarmen, what now? I'm training others. So it was amazing. And so I see, and they were just sending me pictures of him training. I mean, this guy that we helped, they were now training. So it's being try to be inclusive in their language, and also that they feel part of it by having peer-to-peer exchanges.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's so ways to provide always opportunities to people, and yeah, so that's fantastic. So I think we have a bit of time for people in the audience in presentially in Purdue. Jinjin, I don't know exactly how we're going to do it because of the sound, but let's try to see if people have questions.
Yes, can you hear us from this end?
Yeah.
Great. So I have been talking to the audience, and we have a common question for all of the panelists here today. is that we are so glad to see so many women scientists and women staff from FAO and as well as SilvaCarbon. And apparently you are doing so great. And so we were wondering, since we have so many colleagues who are women and working from FAO and the SilvaCarbon, does it mean that both the FAO and also the United States Forest Service are paying more attention to employing more women and also non-binary gender people in their workforce?
Okay, whoever wants to go first.
Maybe I can start, and I think probably at least maybe I can talk from my experience. I think they are given equal opportunity. So I think now that is the reason probably I can be coordinating a global project. And so this is thanks to the opportunity I was given to do so. So that is my experience, at least right now. Back to you, Javier.
And also I wanted to, because we're talking about FAO and then we will let Marcela. So the other thing too, not only try to give equal opportunities, but also the panel, selecting panel for hiring, recruiting new consultants or officers have to be gender balanced. So that's also had, I think, have increased, like I have a better, the evaluations, like it's always helped having the both views. And I think that also have been a key for it.
Thank you. Yes, I will echo what Rocío and Maricarmen said in terms of there are policies, internal policies that will promote diversity, inclusion within our organizations. I'm very glad that this is something that the U.S. Forest Service is supporting. What I think is, yes, sometimes making this type of mainstreaming something together with our partners is a challenge sometimes. But yes, having this type of discussions, like this type of panels, and I see more and more. And now I don't know if it's because of the pandemic that I see so many things available online, webinars, but I'm so glad to see that there is an increasing interest in many of the different types of communities around the forest sector. So yes.
Okay, so thank you very much for your answers. I don't know, Jin, if there is any other question from there. Okay. So well, I think it has been a great discussion. I think I have enjoyed a lot listening to our colleagues here. And I'm very glad to see I have the screen in front of me, and I only see women working in research like Akane and Ankita from Purdue. I see our panelists here. I see Pilar that is supporting us at all times, and I think it's great to have it here. For some reason, they wanted me, a male, to be the moderator, but I can tell you that I was refusing until they forced me. Now, okay, so I just wanted to summarize basically the whole webinar. You have seen that the panelists here are all working in international development organizations. However, ScienceSci is a platform mostly focused on researchers. But still, I think it was a great idea by Jinjin to invite international development organization people, so that we could provide a bit of a vision from what is usually seen as more the action field, the live action field, what the actual implementation in the field. So basically, the audience can see whether there are synergies, whether there are commonalities between, well, if the audience are researchers, between their own fields and what we are doing, because I think that this dialogue between science and decision making is necessary now more than ever, now that we have shorter and shorter time to solve some of the tremendous issues that we have. And I have prepared a little bit of a short number of conclusions from the webinar that we can take all home with us. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read them to you. I was preparing them before. So the first conclusion that I take from the webinar is that inclusiveness and transparency are fundamental to forest and climate action. Second one, I would say that it's that collaborative partnerships from all the way from governments to individuals at different scales are key to tackle gender, age, ethnic imbalances, and provide equal opportunities to all. I would say also, based on the discussion, that things like elements like or measures such as mentorships or innovation platforms, innovation tools, or new platforms such as ScienceEye, for example, could be stepping stones towards achieving social and environmental equity, little by little. Academia and governments, we think that must play a role in creating incentives towards open science and towards information sharing. And finally, to close down the conclusions, I say we must all contribute to defining possible paths towards achieving inclusiveness. While the goal is yet not in our reach, we must all walk together that path. And I think that's all for today. And I don't know if Jinjin or Akane want to close the event, but it has been a pleasure for me, and I hope for all the participants to be here. Any words, any final words?
Yeah, we want to thank all the panelists here for the wonderful talks, and I want to thank all the participants of today's webinar for joining us. And it's a reminder that we have 2 more workshops coming up, and we look forward to continue hearing from you and working with you on the white paper as well. And Akane, do you have anything else?
No, I just wanted to remind about the white paper as well. I just posted another link. I mean, the same link, but again, in the chat. So yeah, if you're interested in joining, please go to the link and leave your name and email. Thank you for joining.
Okay, thanks to all. Thanks. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Jinjin. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Marcela.
Thank you.